Hello, my name is Richard Spindler, and I'm an instructor in mathematics. This is the third video of three to help students study more effectively for their courses and for their subject areas. The first video discussed the importance of your mindset, your attitude, motivation, as well as learning goals for the course or subject area. The second video reviewed some very important techniques in active learning, encouraging you to think about and understand the topics in your studies. In this video, we'll discuss specific techniques to help you remember that information. But I want to emphasize that you want to focus on your understanding of the material, as emphasized in the last video, as much as just trying to remember bits of information. Have you ever met someone at a social event and you forgot their name within 10 minutes? Or if you've tried to remember their name by repeating it to yourself for a while, but you forget it by the end of the event or by the next day? We're going to discuss some more effective techniques for remembering, and even more important for understanding, which supports remembering. And I want to say that, the example I just gave is not unusual for students studying in their courses and for their exams. They forget the material after a day or two from class or after cramming for an exam, oftentimes by simply rereading their notes or the textbook. And we'll see that that is not the most effective way to study for a test, for example. So there are specific methods for retrieval information, meaning recall or remembering from memory. And this is based on experiments in the field of cognitive psychology. You can find many of these methods in the book called Make It Stick, and you'll find a lot more examples than I'm able to give in this short video. So I would encourage you to check out this book. Let's go over some of the basic techniques to assist you in remembering terms, concepts, definitions, procedures, processes, all sorts of information that you'll need to know and remember from your courses or in your subject area. I'll try and use some examples to illustrate. The basic principles are repeated retrieval, effortful retrieval, spacing, and variety. So repeated retrieval means you need to self-quiz yourself on the information regularly. But you don't want to just do that over and over and over again for the same concept or the same idea, right, in a row. Okay? What you want to do is you want to try and make it more difficult over time to recall, because paradoxically, making it harder in a situation where it's harder to recall it, to retrieve it, actually strengthens that memory connection. You also don't want to just do it all in a row. You want to space it out. Okay, you want some time in between that self-quizzing of that topic. It gives your brain and your memory to consolidate that information some more. Okay, and you want to interleave retrievals, which means putting different topics in between each other. That also makes it more difficult. And finally, you want a little bit of variety in your self-quizzing, variety of settings and situations. So suppose I've looked through a guide on a certain set of birds. I like birding, okay, and I enjoy learning about birds. And so I've read the guides, I've listened to recordings about songs because I want to remember birds, and I want to understand them also in other ways. So to periodically self-quiz, every evening I could pull up the pictures of the songs of the birds I want to remember and try to name them from memory. Or I could look at their names and see in my mind what they look like and what they sound like also. I could space these self-quizzes daily and weekly so that some forgetting has set in. Paradoxically, a little bit of forgetting, like say overnight, and then trying again the next day, helps strengthen that memory more than if you just kept repeatedly doing it in a row. Okay, so a little bit of forgetting actually can help. That subsequent difficulty in pulling up the memory strengthens the memory. I could quiz myself under varied situations and interleave different birds in my self-quiz. I would not quiz myself about the birds in the same order. I would sometimes quiz together birds that sound similar together and sometimes not together. I would quiz myself while in my home office or walking around the neighborhood. As I learned bird names, I would have cumulative quizzing by continuing to quiz myself about earlier birds I'd learned, say 3 weeks ago, mixing them up with the new birds I'm learning now. Finally, I would quiz myself in a real setting, out in the fields and woods, trying to identify them by sight and sound. And you might remember from video 2 that I suggested one learning technique is learning in a realistic setting, say experiential learning. And it's amazing, like in my case of birding, how different the birds sound out in the fields and in the woods compared to the recordings, and how different they even look compared to the pictures in the books. And that's a real way of self-quizzing yourself. That's also what I want to be doing. I want to be out there trying to identify. That's part of my whole goal. So it not only is motivating for me, but it also helps me learn them better. And of course, I'm not going to remember all of them. And that's true for you in your subject area. You're not always going to remember them, especially as you make it more difficult. That's okay. That's okay. That's going to happen. So what you need to do is just go back to your resources. In my case, I'd go back to my birding guide or to my recordings and listen to them again, or look them up again, or maybe I'd study their habitats, understand them better. That helps me remember better by understanding them better. And then next time I'm out in the fields, in the woods, I'd be testing myself again, or I'd do my periodically self-quizzing for a while. Now, I want to mention something about flashcards. Flashcards are helpful, and there's even more effective ways of using flashcards than just creating a plain set of flashcards. So I don't discourage you from using flashcards, but I suggest you look up something called the Lightner box. The Lightner box is a flashcard method for doing all the same of these techniques that we just went over. As we just discussed. If you do a web search on Lightner box, you can see how they would organize flashcards to use these techniques to help you recall. Now, what I'd like you to do is imagine doing something similar to these techniques in your courses or subject areas. For example, in mathematics, you could imagine how would you work on remembering definitions or formulas or procedures for solving an algebra, something like that. So just imagine how you would set it up to do these techniques. And then we'll go on to the next slide. So now I'll do a quick review. Without looking back at the last few slides, answer these questions. See if you can test your memory on this. Self-quiz yourself. So let's go over some key points. First, you want to practice retrieval, meaning remembering from your memory, in different ways, in different orders, over time, days, weeks, maybe even months. You want to be cumulative, and you want to combine it with a variety of facts, concepts, procedures, processes that you're learning in the course. You want to move to understanding and relating to your current knowledge, so not just memorizing. So you could even start quizzing yourself about your understanding, much like we discussed in video 2. Now I want to point out something. Inability to remember information is feedback for you on what to study and self-test again. It is not failure. So for example, say you're self-quizzing yourself some evening and boy, you just can't remember what that one term is or what it means, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. That happens for everybody. So take that as feedback of what you need to go back and look up again and figure out how to understand it better. Maybe read a little bit of the textbook or check your notes. And this is why you really took notes, not to reread your notes straight through, but as a resource for when you're self-quizzing to go back and learn that bit of information or understanding that you seem to have forgotten with your self-quizzing. Okay? So again, it's feedback for you. It's not failure. So don't get discouraged because of that. Learn from it and go back to your resources to help you. And finally, don't be fooled in thinking familiarity is the same as remembering and understanding. Oftentimes I see students reread their notes multiple times to study for a test or reread their textbook. What's happening there is the student is becoming familiar with the information, but that doesn't mean they understand it and will be able to remember it. They're basically kind of jamming it into their short-term memory, but not really getting deep down into their long-term memory or connecting with other information to really understand it well. So use the techniques in these 3 videos instead, rather than just rereading notes or textbooks. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about our first video and some of the ideas there. This triangle here was called Bloom's taxonomy, which I don't think you need to remember, but the important part that I want to emphasize is that remembering processes, terms, procedures, and so forth, remember the information of your subject area, when it's easier to recall, will help support you doing these higher level tasks, help you apply it better so that you're not having to look things up, right? If you remember what things are, the information, you'll be able to apply it more easily, okay? But just as important is that if you try to do these higher level tasks, okay, by applying, by analyzing in higher level settings, that will help you recall better, okay? So don't wait till you think you completely remember everything to try these. No, you should be trying these while you're also remembering, and they'll reinforce each other, okay? And I want to point out, what's the point of learning the material in the course or your subject area if you're not going to use it, if you're not going to understand it? They're really, you got to ask yourself, what's the point here of that? And that goes to the next part here, is about mindset, attitude, motivation, and self-confidence. Okay, so motivation. Hopefully, you're motivated to learn it in some way. You're going to use it for another class, maybe for your career. Maybe it's just plain interesting to you. So hopefully, you can find that motivation that'll help you go to these higher level tasks. Okay, and that also goes to mindset. So you want to have the growth mindset where you believe in yourself and you have the self-confidence that if you put enough effort into it and you use effective techniques, not just hard work, but effective hard work, that you can learn it. And that also goes to your attitude toward the course, that you'll be positive and that you believe you can do that. So let's do a quick summary. This is basically of all three videos. Your mindset and attitude are very important in succeeding in learning. You want to examine the learning goals, and you want to focus also on higher level learning, not just memorizing. You can use techniques for understanding the information and storing the knowledge you're learning initially in your classes and your readings. You want to move toward greater understanding of the information, and that will also help you recall. And great techniques for doing these things is active learning. And finally, in this video, we talked about specific techniques to help you recall the information. Very useful ideas for that. So I want to end with the encouraging and positive message that you can do it. With the effective studying techniques and with a positive outlook and a growth mindset, you can do it. Thank you very much, and I hope these have been useful for you.